Did you ever think you'd see a president sign an executive order that reverses gun control laws instead of creating more? Well, it just happened. This is huge, and I mean historic news for gun owners across the country. For years, we've watched the ATF and federal agencies tighten the noose around the Second Amendment, using executive actions and rule changes to push their agenda. But now, we have a president who just signed an order that could wipe out some of the most restrictive gun regulations we've seen in decades. I've covered a lot of Second Amendment news over the years, but what I'm about to break down today is easily one of the most important developments we've seen in the fight to preserve our gun rights. If you own a gun, if you've ever been worried about the creeping restrictions, if you've ever had to second-guess whether an ATF rule change could suddenly make you a criminal, pay attention, because this executive order might change everything. Stick around because I'm going to break down exactly what this means for you, what's inside this order, and what's coming next. So here's the deal. On February 7th, 2025, former President Donald Trump signed an executive order titled Protecting Second Amendment Rights. And let me be clear, this isn't just symbolic. This is real, and it has serious legal consequences. The executive order lays out a plan to roll back anti-gun policies, put federal agencies under a microscope, and potentially eliminate some of the most controversial ATF rules we've been fighting against. One of the biggest things this order does? It tells the Department of Justice to back off. For years, the DOJ has played a major role in supporting legal battles against gun owners, whether it was defending ATF rule changes on pistol braces, forced reset triggers, or aggressive enforcement against FFL holders under their so-called zero-tolerance policy. Now, under this new order, the Attorney General, who by the way is now Pam Bondi, has been directly ordered to review every agency action related to firearms from 2021 to 2025. That means all the rule changes, all the executive actions, everything that claimed to be about safety, but was really about infringing on your rights. It's all up for review. This is huge. Think about what that means. That includes everything from Biden's executive orders on gun control, the ATF's expansion of its power, the White House's so-called Office of Gun Violence Prevention, and even international agreements that could have impacted imports and restrictions on certain firearms. The government is now being forced to take a second look at every gun control move they've made over the last 4 years. And here's the kicker. It doesn't stop at just reviewing those policies. The executive order demands a plan of action to undo anything that infringes on Second Amendment rights. This is not just another empty promise. It's a direct command for the federal government to correct course. The executive order specifically tells agencies to examine every firearm-related action from January 2021 to January 2025 to see if they violate Second Amendment rights. That means if a policy was introduced under the guise of gun safety but actually infringes on law-abiding gun owners, it's now under review. And that's not all. The order also demands a full review of all ATF rules and regulations during that period, including their firearm classifications, their licensing policies for dealers, and their zero-tolerance policy that's been shutting down gun stores left and right. If you're a gun owner, a manufacturer, or an FFL holder, this is massive. The ATF's aggressive enforcement of their rule changes, whether it was pistol braces, frame and receiver redefinitions, or FRTs, could all be reversed under this review. The zero-tolerance policy that has been shutting down FFLs over tiny paperwork errors? That's on the chopping block too. But here's what really caught my attention. The lawsuits. This executive order specifically directs the Attorney General to review the government's position on every lawsuit that could impact Second Amendment rights. That means they're looking at cases involving pistol braces, forced reset triggers, and even ongoing legal battles against ATF overreach. Think about what that means. If the federal government withdraws from these lawsuits, that's a game changer. We could see the government step back and allow courts to side with gun owners instead of constantly fighting against them. If this happens the way it's outlined, the ATF's legal battles could crumble, because if the DOJ stops defending them, they've got no leg to stand on. This isn't just about individual policies. It's about changing the entire way the government interacts with Second Amendment rights. And that's why this executive order is so significant. For years, we've seen politicians and bureaucrats chip away at our gun rights under the justification of public safety. They tell us it's about preventing crime, but in reality, it's always been about control. Control over what you can own, how you can carry, and even if you can defend yourself. But now, we're seeing a shift. This order is saying, Enough is enough. It's about restoring rights, not restricting them. And that's why this could be one of the biggest Second Amendment victories we've ever seen. Now let's get into the details, because what's inside this executive order isn't just big, it's game-changing. There are multiple sections that lay out exactly what's happening, and I'm going to break them down so you know exactly what this means for you. First, we've got Section 1, Purpose. This is where the executive order makes its stance clear. It states that the Second Amendment is essential to the security and liberty of the American people. It recognizes that the right to keep and bear arms has been foundational to our country since the beginning, and that any infringement on this right threatens all other freedoms. This isn't just some political talking point, it's a statement that directly challenges the way federal agencies have been treating gun rights for years. The government is now officially acknowledging that the restrictions we've seen aren't just inconvenient, they're a threat to liberty. Then we move to Section 2, the Plan of Action. And this is where things get serious. The executive order gives the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, 30 days to conduct a full review of everything related to federal firearm regulations over the past 4 years. That means every executive action, every agency ruling, every policy that even remotely touches on guns is going under the microscope. The review isn't just about identifying problematic policies, it's about taking action. The order specifically names certain areas that must be looked at. First, all executive actions from January 2021 to January 2025 that claim to promote public safety but actually restricted gun rights must be reassessed. That means things like the bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which was used to justify expanded background checks, red flag funding, and restrictions on gun sellers, could be in jeopardy. Next, it calls for a review of all ATF rules and regulations during that same time period. That means the pistol brace ban, the redefinition of frames and receivers, the forced reset trigger crackdown, and any licensing rule changes are all up for reconsideration. If they're found to be unconstitutional, they could be rolled back completely. And it doesn't stop there. The executive order goes after ATF enforcement policies, particularly the zero-tolerance policy that's been used to shut down FFLs over minor paperwork errors. If you don't know, this policy has been one of the biggest weapons the ATF has used to target gun dealers, and it has led to hundreds of FFLs losing their licenses for tiny mistakes, things that wouldn't have mattered before. Well, that could be gone soon. Another massive part of this order is its impact on ongoing lawsuits. The Attorney General is required to review every federal court case that involves the Second Amendment and consider whether the government should withdraw from them. That means lawsuits involving pistol braces, FRTs, 80% lowers, suppressors, and even state-level bans could take a major turn in favor of gun owners. If the DOJ backs out of fighting against these cases, it could clear the way for court victories that restore gun rights across the board. And this isn't just about domestic policies. The executive order also takes a look at international agreements that could impact firearms. That means the United Nations Small Arms Treaties, the Sporting Purposes Clause, and other agreements that limit gun imports are now under review. If the administration moves to eliminate the Sporting Purposes Clause, that could open up the market for more imported firearms and accessories, which have been heavily restricted for years. But what does this really mean for gun owners? Well, it could be one of the biggest wins we've seen in modern history. If this executive order leads to the reversal of ATF rules, gun owners across the country could finally get real relief from unconstitutional restrictions. Pistol braces could be legal again without needing to register them. FRTs and similar triggers might no longer be considered machine guns. The arbitrary classifications of firearms and accessories could be scrapped entirely. For FFL holders and gun stores, this is equally huge. If the zero-tolerance policy is repealed, that means gun dealers won't have to live in fear that one clerical mistake could cost them their license. The rollback of ATF rule changes could mean fewer surprise inspections, fewer unnecessary restrictions, and a return to fair regulations. For manufacturers, this could mean more freedom to innovate. ATF rulings on things like 80% receivers, parts kits, and suppressors have been strangling innovation in the firearms industry. If those restrictions are lifted, we could see a huge resurgence in new products hitting the market. And then, there's the legal side of things. If the government withdraws from ongoing lawsuits, we could see massive wins in the courts. Think about it. If the ATF suddenly stops defending their own rule changes, that paves the way for these cases to be decided in favor of gun owners. That means less regulation, fewer bans, and stronger protections for the Second Amendment. This executive order isn't just pro-gun, it's anti-regulation. It's about rolling back the bureaucratic overreach that's been suffocating gun rights for years. It's a direct challenge to the federal government's ability to create gun control laws without Congress. And if this plays out the way it's written, it could permanently shift the way gun laws are made and enforced in this country. But let's be real, this isn't going to go down without a fight. The anti-gun lobby is already going crazy over this, and you can bet there will be lawsuits, political pushback, and media outrage. Blue states aren't going to comply willingly, and federal agencies like the ATF may try to drag their feet in implementing these changes. We could also see new lawsuits challenging the executive order itself. So while this is huge news, it's not the end of the fight. It's just the beginning. This is the first step in undoing years of damage. But we need to stay engaged, informed, and ready to push back against the resistance that's coming. Because make no mistake, this is a turning point. This executive order isn't just about the Second Amendment. It's about government overreach, personal freedom, and the fight to keep America from sliding further into unconstitutional territory. If this order leads to real action, it could mark the beginning of a new era for gun rights in this country. And I don't know about you, but I'm damn ready to see that happen. Now, as much as this executive order is a massive win for the Second Amendment, we have to be honest about the roadblocks ahead. Just because something is written on paper doesn't mean the fight is over. In fact, I'd argue this is where the battle really begins, because there are forces in Washington, in the courts, and in the media that will do everything they can to shut this down before it can take effect. First off, Congress and the courts. Executive orders aren't permanent. A future president could try to undo this with a stroke of a pen. That's exactly how we got into this mess in the first place. Biden, Obama, and even Trump himself used executive orders to change firearm regulations without going through Congress. So while this is a huge win, it's only as strong as the administration enforcing it. If another anti-gun president takes office, they could reverse everything. The only way to truly secure these changes is through congressional action or court rulings that set legal precedents. And that's why this executive order directing the DOJ to reconsider its legal battles is so important. Because if these rules get overturned in court, they become much harder to reinstate. But let's be real, gun control groups are going to fight this with everything they have. You can bet that organizations like Everytown for Gun Safety and Giffords are already preparing lawsuits to challenge this executive order. They'll argue that the president doesn't have the authority to undo regulations like this. They'll pressure blue state attorneys general to step in and file their own legal challenges. And since courts have been inconsistent when it comes to Second Amendment rulings, we could see a long legal battle ahead. Then there's the state-level resistance. Just because the federal government backs off doesn't mean blue states are suddenly going to respect the Second Amendment. California, New York, Illinois, they're all going to double down on their restrictive gun laws. We've already seen states like Washington and Oregon push their own assault weapons bans and magazine restrictions, and they'll keep doing it no matter what happens at the federal level. So while this executive order is a massive step in the right direction, we have to remember that the fight isn't just in Washington, it's also happening in our state legislatures. And let's not forget the ATF itself. Bureaucracies don't like to lose power. The ATF has spent years expanding its authority through rulemaking, and now they're being told to stand down. Do you think they're just going to accept that quietly? No way. Expect the ATF to slow walk any changes, to try to reinterpret the executive order in ways that keep their power intact, and to find new ways to enforce restrictions under different legal justifications. This agency has a history of playing the long game, and I wouldn't be surprised if they start looking for new ways to regulate firearms, even if this order forces them to back off on certain fronts. So where does that leave us? Well, the next 30 days are going to be crucial. That's the timeline the executive order gives Pam Bondi and the DOJ to review all these gun control policies and present a plan of action. If this administration is serious about making changes, we should start seeing real movement soon. The DOJ should be making announcements about what lawsuits they're withdrawing from. The ATF should start revising or outright rescinding some of their rules. And if that doesn't happen, we'll know exactly who is dragging their feet. In the meantime, there's one thing every gun owner should do. Stay engaged. This is not the time to sit back and assume everything will work out. We need to be watching closely because just as easily as this executive order was signed, it can be undermined if people aren't paying attention. Stay informed, follow the lawsuits, support Pro-2A organizations that are fighting these battles in court, and most importantly, don't let up on the pressure. Because if we push hard enough, we can turn this executive order into real, lasting change. At the end of the day, this is about more than just guns. It's about freedom. The Second Amendment was never just about hunting or sports shooting. It's about the fundamental right to defend yourself, your family, and your country. And every time the government tries to chip away at that right, they're really chipping away at your ability to live as a free citizen. This executive order is a huge step toward restoring the balance, but it's up to us to make sure it actually happens. Because here's the truth. When the government takes your rights, they don't give them back unless you fight for them. And today, we've got a real chance to win that fight. Let me know what you think in the comments. Is this executive order the game changer we've been waiting for, or do you think it won't go far enough? Either way, this is one of the biggest Second Amendment moves we've seen in years, and I'll be here to keep you updated every step of the way. If you found this video helpful, make sure to like, subscribe, and share so more people can stay informed. And remember, the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed.